Flight attendant forces black woman to sit at the back. 2 minutes later, karma strikes. The cabin was alive with the restless shuffle of passengers settling into their seats. Luggage compartments slammed shut, phones buzzed with last-minute messages, and the muted hum of conversation filled the air. Amid the routine chaos of boarding, one woman drew more attention than she should have. She walked down the aisle with the kind of composure that made it clear she belonged exactly where she was. Mid-30s, dressed in a tailored suit, her carry-on neatly in hand. She wasn't flaunting anything, yet a few eyes lingered longer than necessary. A man in a polo shirt frowned as she passed, whispering something to his seatmate. A woman clutching a designer bag shifted uncomfortably, as though proximity alone unsettled her. The woman ignored it all. She'd worked too hard, endured too much to let side glances define her place. When she reached her row in first class, she set her bag down and slid into her seat with a calm authority. She belonged there, not by chance, not by favor, but because she had earned it. Still, the whispers didn't stop. A teenager 2 rows back tilted his phone slightly, recording under the pretense of scrolling. A businessman cleared his throat in exaggerated disapproval. These weren't loud confrontations, but they pressed against her like a silent question. "Do you really think you belong up here?" She straightened her shoulders and unfolded the airline magazine, determined not to flinch. The seatbelt clicked. She exhaled quietly. Then the shadow fell over her. The flight attendant, uniform perfectly pressed, leaned in with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Ma'am," her voice was polite but firm, "this seat isn't for you. You'll need to move to the back." The magazine lowered slowly from her hands. Around her, the soft chatter died into a heavy silence. Dozens of eyes turned her way, waiting to see if she would shrink into the background or stand her ground. If you're watching this, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button so you never miss powerful real stories like this. And let me know in the comments, what country are you watching from? The boarding line stretched down the jet bridge, passengers inching forward with weary impatience. Business travelers scrolled on their phones, families herded children, and attendants called out seat groups in mechanical rhythm. Nothing about it should have been remarkable. And yet, when she stepped forward, conversations faltered as if the air itself had shifted. Her posture was deliberate, neither hurried nor hesitant. With one hand steady on her leather carry-on and the other adjusting the strap of her purse, she moved toward the aircraft door. Flight attendants at the entrance smiled with the automatic warmth they reserved for first-class travelers. But one of them faltered, her expression tightening for just a second before recovering. The woman noticed. She always noticed. Walking into the narrow aisle of the cabin, she felt the eyes. They rarely stared outright, but they lingered just long enough to speak volumes. A middle-aged couple in matching polo shirts glanced at each other, their lips tugging down as if to say, "She must be lost." A young man already seated near the window let his gaze trail from her polished shoes to the neat bun at the back of her head, then scoffed softly, shaking his head as though she were trespassing. Still, she held her ground. She was used to these silent audits of her worthiness, used to people who could not reconcile her presence with their expectations of who belonged where. She stopped at her row. The seat aisle first class was hers. She pulled her boarding pass free for a moment, double-checking not because she doubted herself, but because she wanted no excuse left dangling in the air. The row number was correct. The seat was hers. Sliding her bag into the overhead bin, she smoothed the front of her jacket and lowered herself into the wide leather seat. A man across the aisle exhaled sharply through his nose, muttering something under his breath about people these days. Another passenger angled his body away from her, as though proximity to her was some silent inconvenience. Her heart didn't race. It rarely did in these moments anymore. She had built her life on navigating rooms that doubted her presence, boardrooms, banks, hotels, and she would not shrink now, here, over a plane ticket she had rightfully purchased. The murmurs traveled like low static. A teenager a few rows back tugged at his mother's sleeve, whispering, "How'd she get up here?" The mother hushed him quickly, casting a nervous glance in her direction. But the words had already landed, reinforcing the same script she'd seen all her life. Success wasn't supposed to look like her. She picked up the in-flight magazine from the pocket in front of her, turning the glossy pages without seeing them. The cover featured a smiling family on a Caribbean beach. A staged fantasy, she thought. She wondered briefly if the photographer would have chosen a family that looked like hers. Probably not. More passengers shuffled in, each glance a quiet reminder that her existence in this seat was a disruption to someone's unspoken order of things. But disruption, she knew, was often where change began. She crossed one leg over the other and leaned back, shoulders squared, letting the cabin settle around her. For a brief moment, there was silence. The kind of silence that could have meant the tension had faded. But then, out of the corner of her eye, she caught movement. The same flight attendant who had greeted her at the door now stood a few rows away, arms folded loosely, watching. Her gaze wasn't neutral. It was weighted, assessing, brimming with the same question others had whispered. The difference was that this time, the question wasn't silent. Her eyes narrowed, lips pressed in a thin line, fixed directly on the woman in the aisle seat. And in that glare, the calm before the storm revealed itself. The pause didn't last long. The flight attendant broke it with a click of her polished shoes against the carpet as she stepped closer. Her voice, measured but sharp around the edges, cut through the low hum of passengers still settling in. "Ma'am, this seat isn't yours," she said, each word landing like a dismissal rather than a statement. "You'll need to gather your things and move to the back." The magazine lowered from the woman's lap. She met the attendant's gaze, her expression calm, though the sting of the moment wasn't lost on her. Around her, the rustle of seatbelts and bags slowed. People were listening now. "Yes, it is," she replied evenly. "My ticket is for this seat." The attendant tilted her head, smiles stretched too thin to disguise irritation. "No, these seats are reserved. You must have been mistaken when you booked. Economy is behind the curtain." Her voice carried louder than necessary, projecting across the row so every ear could catch the accusation. A man across the aisle raised his eyebrows, entertained. A woman 2 rows back muttered, "I knew it." The atmosphere began to tilt. The passenger didn't raise her voice. She didn't flinch. She slid her boarding pass out from the small purse resting by her feet and held it up, the print clear, the seat number undeniable. The attendant didn't glance at it. Instead, she gave a tight laugh, short and dismissive. "I don't think so. Let's not cause a scene. Please collect your belongings and head toward the back where you belong." The last 3 words weren't shouted, but they didn't need to be. They cut like a slap, sharp enough for nearby passengers to shift uncomfortably in their seats. The woman let the silence hang for a heartbeat. Then she placed the boarding pass deliberately on the armrest and folded her hands over it. Her voice was steady, her posture unyielding. "I'm not moving. This is my seat." The quiet in the cabin deepened, almost unnatural. A child in the row ahead twisted in his seat to watch. A businessman leaned out into the aisle, phone in hand, the lens angled just enough to record. The attendant's face tightened, the mask slipping. "Don't make this difficult. You're holding everyone up." She gestured broadly, as though the entire plane was waiting on compliance. "If you refuse to move, I'll have to involve the captain." Gasps fluttered through the rows. A murmur rose, not loud, but enough to fill the air with tension. Passengers exchanged glances, some curious, others uneasy, a few smirking like they were watching exactly the sort of drama they secretly expected from her. Still, the woman didn't move. She didn't shout, didn't plead. She sat there with the quiet conviction of someone who had been tested before and refused to bow. Her eyes never left the attendant's. The stare down lingered until the attendant, flustered and red around the cheeks, grabbed the intercom. "If you won't cooperate," she said, her voice clipped, "then I'll call the captain right now." The cabin froze. The flight attendant's words still hung in the air like a challenge, and the cabin responded with uneasy ripples. A cough from the back, a seatbelt click, the faint squeak of leather as people shifted in their chairs, small sounds that revealed more than outright speech ever could. Then came the voices. A woman near the middle rows leaned toward her husband, whispering just loud enough to carry. "Why doesn't she just move? It's not worth all this trouble." He nodded in agreement, muttering, "Exactly, she's holding everyone up." But not every whisper agreed. The young man with earbuds dangling from his collar muttered back, his voice firm despite being low. "She's not doing anything wrong. She bought that seat like the rest of us." The words landed unevenly in the cabin, drawing a sharp glare from the woman who had complained. She shook her head, tightening her grip on her designer bag, as though the quiet resistance was more offensive than the confrontation itself. A child's voice broke through next, innocent and direct. "Mom, why is she in trouble?" The mother hushed him quickly, eyes darting nervously to the attendant, as if worried that even a child's question might be taken the wrong way. The woman in the seat remained composed, back straight, hands folded. She hadn't moved, hadn't raised her voice. Her presence alone seemed to split the cabin in two, those who resented her defiance and those who silently admired it. The flight attendant, clearly rattled by the lack of immediate compliance, pressed her intercom button with clipped fingers. "Captain, I have a passenger refusing to follow instructions. She's non-compliant." Her voice carried, deliberately loud enough for nearby rows to hear. The word non-compliant hung heavier than it should have, painting the woman not as a paying customer, but as a problem, a disruption, a threat. Passengers glanced at one another, some raising brows, some pursing lips, others pulling out phones to document. "Non-compliant?" The man with the earbuds muttered under his breath, shaking his head. "She's just sitting down." The murmurs swelled, competing currents of opinion flowing through the rows. "She should just go back and avoid the scene." "No, this is wrong. Why is she making it harder for everyone?" "She's standing up for herself. Good for her." The tension was no longer quiet. It was a low buzz, vibrating through every seat, every sidelong glance. The woman herself remained still. Not a word left her lips as the attendant snapped the radio back into place and marched down the aisle, her posture rigid, her face burning with frustrated authority. From the window, passengers near the front noticed figures moving toward the plane. Ground staff in reflective vests, summoned before the doors had even closed, their steps purposeful as they prepared to board. A teenager leaned out to catch a glimpse. "They called backup," he whispered, phone raised just high enough to catch the approach. His screen glowed faintly, broadcasting live to whoever would watch. The cabin quieted again, everyone bracing for what came next. The flight wasn't even in motion, yet the atmosphere felt suspended, waiting for the moment when strangers in uniforms would step through the narrow door and decide who belonged and who did not. The doors of the aircraft were still wide open, and down the jet bridge, ground staff were coming. The clicking of polished shoes announced his arrival before he even appeared. The captain stepped into the cabin, his expression drawn tight with irritation, jaw stiff as if his time had already been wasted. He glanced quickly across the rows, then fixed on the flight attendant, who was standing tall at the aisle like she had delivered justice. "What's the problem?" His voice was clipped, carrying just enough to silence the murmurs. The attendant wasted no time. "She's being disruptive, Captain. Refusing to follow instructions. I've asked her to move several times, and she's holding everyone up." Gasps flickered like sparks through the rows. Disruptive. The word echoed the earlier accusation of non-compliant. To those listening, it painted her not as a customer, not as a passenger, but as a threat to order. The captain's eyes landed on the woman seated calmly in her aisle chair. He looked her over in one sweep, as if assessing whether she matched the accusation. His brow furrowed. "Ma'am, is this true?" Her hands rested folded on the boarding pass in her lap. She tilted her chin upward, her voice even and deliberate. "No, I purchased this seat. I paid the same as anyone here. I belong in this row." Her calmness was a striking contrast to the clipped urgency around her. For a moment, the rows seemed to tilt in her direction, passengers sitting straighter, eyes sharp with curiosity, waiting for what would happen next. The captain exhaled heavily through his nose, his impatience visible. He looked back to the flight attendant, who nodded as though her account should be enough. Then his attention returned to the passenger. "Ma'am," he said, his tone shifting into stern authority, "this plane can't depart until you cooperate. I'm asking you to respect crew instructions and move to another seat." The words landed heavy, weighted not with fairness, but with hierarchy. "Our rules, your compliance." A woman seated 2 rows behind muttered softly, "She's not doing anything wrong." Another passenger, bolder, spoke just loud enough to be heard. "She paid for it. Let her sit." Phones lifted higher now, small screens glowing. A teenager angled his lens carefully, catching both the captain and the seated passenger in the same frame. Another man tapped his screen, sending a live stream out into the world beyond the cabin walls. The black woman's eyes never left the captain's. Her shoulders remained squared, her voice steady. "I am cooperating," she said. I boarded respectfully. "I've taken the seat printed on my ticket. What I won't do is give it up because someone has decided I don't belong in it." The words struck deeper than volume ever could. The silence after carried more weight than argument. The captain's lips tightened. He was accustomed to authority being final, not questioned. His gaze flicked to the attendant, who stood with folded arms, a smirk just beginning to creep across her face. "Ma'am," the captain repeated, his voice harder now, "this isn't up for debate. If you continue to resist, we will be forced to remove you from this flight." A sharp intake of breath echoed from the back. A little girl whispered, "Why?" only to be hushed quickly by her father. Still, the woman didn't flinch. She looked forward now, breaking eye contact with both the captain and the attendant, as if to claim the silence itself as hers. The attendant stepped forward, emboldened by the captain's tone. "See? She's making this harder for everyone. We can't let her disrupt the entire flight." "Disrupt?" A young man with his phone raised shot back. "She's sitting in her seat. That's it. You're the ones causing the delay." The captain's head snapped toward him, irritation flashing in his eyes. "Sir, stay out of this. It doesn't concern you." "Oh, it concerns all of us," the man muttered, his phone still recording. The captain straightened, as if preparing to end the discussion outright. His mouth opened, but before the words came, the cabin door hissed. Down the aisle, wearing a reflective badge and a no-nonsense expression, the ground supervisor stepped into the plane. And suddenly, the cabin seemed to hold its breath. The supervisor stepped into the cabin with the sort of practiced calm meant to quiet storms. His reflective badge caught the overhead lights, his clipboard tucked under one arm. He gave the captain a curt nod before turning toward the woman seated firmly in her place. "Ma'am," he began, voice even, "I understand there's been some difficulty. To avoid delay for the rest of the passengers, I'd like to ask you to please move to another seat." The words were polite enough, but everyone could hear the subtext. Be the one to compromise so the plane can leave on time. The woman didn't rush to answer. She sat still, spine straight, her boarding pass still resting in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, carrying just enough volume to travel across the first-class cabin. "This is my assigned seat. I paid for it. I've done nothing wrong. Moving would mean admitting that I don't belong here, and I do." A flicker of discomfort passed through the supervisor's expression. He wasn't used to resistance phrased so calmly. He adjusted the clipboard in his hand, his jaw tightening. "I hear you," he said, "but we have a full flight. We can't afford delays. Please, for the sake of the schedule." She shook her head once, controlled, resolute. "Schedules don't erase injustice. If I move, it won't be the last time someone thinks they can push me back." The words struck. A low murmur rippled through nearby rows. Some passengers avoided her eyes, pretending to read magazines or fiddle with seatbelts. Others leaned forward, watching intently, as though witnessing something that could no longer be ignored. The flight attendant, standing just behind the supervisor, rolled her eyes dramatically. Then, leaning toward a colleague by the galley, she whispered, too carelessly, "People like her always cause problems." It wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. The teenager's phone caught it. The man with the earbuds recorded it. The microphone of another passenger's live stream picked it up clear as day. "Did she just say that?" someone hissed. A collective stir moved across first class. The air shifted, no longer just tense but charged. The remark had cracked the fragile mask of professionalism the flight attendant had worn, revealing something ugly beneath. The woman in the seat didn't flinch. Her gaze flicked briefly toward the attendant, then back to the supervisor. Calm, unyielding. "This isn't about policy anymore," she said. "It's about prejudice, and I won't feed it by giving up my seat." Her words pressed into the silence until the only sounds were the faint hum of the ventilation system and the clicking of phone cameras. The supervisor's face tightened further. He glanced at the captain, who shifted uncomfortably under the watching eyes of a dozen recording phones. Neither moved to defend the attendant's remark. Neither denied what had just been caught on camera. Instead, the supervisor tried again, his tone thinner now. "Ma'am, I don't want this to escalate." "It already has," a voice from row 3 muttered. Heads turned, whispers swelled. "She's right. That's messed up. Did you hear what the attendant said?" The comments weren't shouted, but they threaded together into something undeniable. And just like that, first class was no longer silent. It was murmuring, restless, alive with judgment, but not aimed at the woman anymore. The balance was shifting. The murmur in the cabin was growing louder, but the real storm had already begun beyond the walls of the aircraft. The teenager in row 5, earbuds swinging loosely around his neck, tapped rapidly on his phone screen. He wasn't just recording anymore, he had gone live. With a tilt of the camera, he captured the woman's calm defiance, the flight attendant's pinched glare, and the supervisor's uneasy posture. The caption he typed needed no exaggeration. She paid for first class. They're trying to push her to the back. Within seconds, the feed filled with blinking hearts and lines of scrolling text. What airline is this? Stay strong, Queen. Oh no, not in 2025. This isn't happening. Tag me in the full video when you save it. He smirked faintly, angling the phone higher as another passenger whispered, "Are you live right now?" His nod drew a quiet gasp. The quiet incident that had been confined to a single cabin was no longer confined at all. Meanwhile, the woman in the seat sat steady, unaware that her image was already traveling across thousands of screens, then tens of thousands more as viewers shared and reposted. To her, the tension was still bound to the narrow aisle, the rattling of luggage compartments, the simmering stares. But outside, the wildfire was spreading. In row 2, another passenger whispered to his wife, "It's already trending, I just checked." He tilted his phone discreetly. The video had cracked 15,000 views in under 5 minutes. The contained silence of first class clashed with the chaos pouring across the internet. Strangers miles away debated, argued, rallied, all while the cabin itself sat suspended and waiting. The supervisor shifted uncomfortably. He had been in these situations before, delays, complaints, disputes over seating, but never with the heat of half a dozen cameras burning his every move. He glanced at the captain, who stood rigid, arms crossed, trying to project control but failing to mask the twitch in his jaw. The attendant, on the other hand, hadn't yet realized how exposed she was. She leaned toward her colleague again, whispering, "Watch. She'll fold any second." But another passenger's phone caught it, every dismissive word sealed into the growing archive online. By now, notifications were buzzing. Someone's smartwatch lit up with a headline, "Viral. Passenger refuses to give up seat after flight attendant demands move." Another's phone chimed with a message from a friend outside the airport. "Are you on that plane? It's all over Twitter." The disconnect was dizzying. Inside, the woman sat calm, surrounded by a press of judgment and silence. Outside, thousands of strangers were rallying to her side. Her quiet resistance amplified into something far larger than the rows of leather seats and narrow windows could contain. "Look," the teenager whispered to no one in particular, showing his phone. "Already at 50,000. A businessman muttered from behind his newspaper, "This is getting out of hand." His words dripped with irritation, not at the injustice, but at the inconvenience of being part of a story he couldn't escape. Another voice countered sharply, "Out of hand? She's just sitting in the seat she paid for. What's out of hand is how they're treating her." The division inside the cabin mirrored the division online, resentment against resistance, dismissal against solidarity. The two worlds, though separate, were now feeding each other, amplifying with every refresh. The captain's radio buzzed suddenly, loud enough to make a few passengers jump. He turned sharply, pressing it to his ear, his face darkening as he listened. The ground crew's voice was low, urgent. When he lowered the radio, his jaw was clenched tighter than before. He shot a look at the supervisor, then at the attendant, whose smug posture faltered. Word had already reached the ground team, and worse for them, corporate was aware. The supervisor straightened, unease flashing across his features. The hierarchy that had always protected the uniform was shifting, and every passenger in the cabin could feel it. The captain's radio crackled again, sharper this time. His eyes flicked toward the supervisor, then down the aisle where every passenger leaned forward, waiting. He pressed the button hard, his voice low, clipped. "Say again?" The reply was firm, official, and stripped of any ambiguity. Headquarters was already watching. The captain stiffened. Headquarters never called unless the situation had jumped far beyond routine. He listened for a long moment, jaw flexing as he absorbed words no one else could hear. When the transmission ended, he lowered the device slowly, the weight of it heavy in his hand. Passengers shifted uneasily. A few whispered, "What did they say?" But no answer came. The flight attendant stood straighter now, arms folded, wearing the satisfied smirk of someone who thought backup had just arrived to reinforce her authority. "Finally," she muttered under her breath. "They'll deal with her properly." The woman in the seat didn't respond. She hadn't moved since the first demand. Her presence alone seemed louder than the captain's radio, louder than the phones recording every twitch of the crew's faces. She wasn't shouting, wasn't pleading, wasn't bending. Her silence was its own kind of resistance, growing heavier with every second. The captain exhaled sharply and approached her row. "Ma'am, corporate is aware of this situation," he said, his voice carrying the reluctant weight of someone who no longer felt in full control. "This is not how we want to proceed, but you are making it difficult for us to complete this flight." Her eyes lifted to meet his, calm, unwavering. She didn't flinch. "I'm not the one making it difficult. I'm sitting where I paid to sit. That hasn't changed." A ripple of murmurs passed through the rows again, some supportive, some skeptical. The teenager recording whispered to his camera, "She's not backing down. She doesn't need to. Corporate's watching now." The flight attendant laughed quietly, shaking her head. "She's just dragging it out. This'll be over soon." Her voice carried, dripping with disdain. She still believed this confrontation would end with the passenger forced off, humiliated, erased from first class. But for the first time, a note of doubt flickered across the captain's face. His radio buzzed again. He snatched it up quickly, listened, and this time his expression cracked. His lips parted, then closed, then parted again as though the words caught in his throat. Passengers leaned in, straining to read him. The woman remained perfectly still. Her calm presence, set against the attendant's restless shifts and the captain's unraveling authority, only magnified her quiet power. The flight attendant, impatient, stepped forward again. "Captain, do you want me to escort her out? We can't waste time on this. She's holding us all hostage." Several passengers gasped at the word, hostage. Phones angled higher. Someone muttered, "She's sitting quietly. How's that a hostage situation?" Another voice rose from the back. "That's not what's happening here. Don't twist it." The captain didn't answer her. Instead, he pressed the radio to his lips again, listening carefully, then froze. His spine stiffened as the directive came through, leaving no room for interpretation. The order came from higher than him, higher than the supervisor, higher than the smug attendant, who still thought victory was hers. The captain lowered the radio slowly, his face drained of its earlier arrogance. His eyes darted briefly to the supervisor, then to the attendant, who was still smiling faintly, oblivious to the shift that had just occurred. Passengers sensed it before anyone said a word. The atmosphere was tilting again, slipping from the crew's grasp. Finally, with a voice flatter than before, the captain spoke. "Headquarters has given instructions," he said, almost reluctantly. His paws stretched, the silence pressing against every row, and then the words fell like a gavel. "I've been ordered to stand down." The captain's announcement landed like a shockwave across the cabin. "I've been ordered to stand down." For a moment, no one moved. The silence was so complete it felt as though the entire plane was holding its breath. Then a soft buzz rose, a mix of whispers, gasps, and the faint clicks of recording phones capturing every angle. Passengers turned in their seats, eyes darting between the woman still seated calmly and the crew whose confidence was unraveling. The flight attendant's smirk froze on her lips. She blinked rapidly, as though the words hadn't registered, then stepped closer to the captain. "Excuse me? That can't be right. You're not just going to let her sit there." The captain didn't answer. He didn't have to. The authority had shifted, and everyone in the cabin knew it. The supervisor cleared his throat, his voice low and stiff. "Corporate has reviewed the situation. Their instructions are clear. The passenger remains in her seat. This matter is not up for debate." The attendant's face flushed crimson. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. "Sir, with respect, this is absurd. She's the one disrupting everything. Not me. Not us." From row 3, someone muttered, "She's been sitting quietly the whole time." A ripple of soft agreement moved through the seats. Someone clapped once, then stopped, unsure. The woman, still in her seat, finally looked up. Her voice was calm, steady, but carried across the rows like a bell. "This isn't just about me, it's about dignity." The words sliced through the tension, clear and undeniable. Phones tilted higher. A teenager whispered, "That line alone is going viral." Passengers shifted again, but this time the energy was different. Where there had been unease, there was now something else. quiet support. A middle-aged man in a suit nodded firmly. A young woman whispered, "She's right." A child whispered loudly to his father, "She's brave." The attendant's composure cracked. Her hands trembled as she adjusted her blazer, her voice rising higher than before. "You can't be serious? You're really going to let her challenge us in front of everyone? This sets a dangerous precedent." The captain stiffened, but he said nothing. The supervisor looked at her evenly, his voice sharper now. "Enough. Headquarters has spoken. The passenger is staying." The attendant let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head in disbelief. Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. She turned toward her colleague in the galley, whispering harshly, "They're throwing me under the bus." But her whisper was not low enough. The glow of phones caught it. Another passenger chuckled softly, shaking his head. Then the clapping started again. This time it didn't stop. A few scattered applauses turned into something larger, a wave of quiet but unmistakable approval. It wasn't rowdy or wild. It was restrained, dignified, the kind of applause that carried solidarity. The woman in the seat didn't bask in it. She simply adjusted her jacket and looked forward, chin raised. Her power was in refusing to be moved, literally and figuratively. The attendant's face darkened, her voice rising with a shrill edge. "This is humiliating. You can't expect me to continue this flight under these conditions, not with her sitting there like she won something." The supervisor stepped closer, his tone no longer diplomatic but final. "You're right about one thing. You won't be continuing this flight." Her head snapped toward him, eyes wide. "What?" "You've been instructed to step off," he said, his voice carrying clearly down the aisle. "Corporate's orders. Gather your belongings." The stunned silence that followed was deafening. Passengers leaned forward, mouths parted, eyes wide. The very woman who had demanded obedience, who had tried to strip another of her dignity, was now the one being stripped of her authority. Phones caught every angle. Murmurs surged through first class, disbelief mixing with satisfaction. The flight attendant stood frozen, her jaw tightening, her chest rising and falling quickly. The supervisor didn't flinch. He repeated louder this time, "You are leaving this flight, now." And with that, the cabin shifted again, this time permanently. The order echoed down the aisle like a final verdict. "You are leaving this flight, now." For a heartbeat, the flight attendant didn't move. Her jaw tightened, her fists clenched at her sides, her whole body straining against the humiliation. Passengers stared, phones lifted, recording every twitch of her face. Finally, with a sharp inhale through her nose, she reached for the handle of her trolley bag. The wheels rattled angrily against the floor as she yanked it from the galley. Her voice broke the silence, high-pitched with rage. "This is ridiculous. I've served this airline for years and I'm treated like this?" No one answered. Instead, the sound of applause began. Soft at first, then stronger. A few claps turned into a ripple, then into a wave. Some passengers smiled openly as they recorded, their cameras following her as she stomped down the aisle. The irony was too sharp to miss. She had tried to strip dignity from someone quietly sitting in her rightful place. Now, her own dignity was being stripped publicly, step by step, under the same watchful eyes she had tried to rally against the woman. "Good riddance," someone whispered loudly enough to be caught on several recordings. Another passenger muttered, "That's justice right there." The attendant's face burned as she pulled her trolley past row after row of unsympathetic stares. Her voice rose, bitter and defensive. "You're all making a mistake. You don't know the whole story." But the truth was already out. Phones had captured it. Social media had already judged. And the passengers knew exactly what they had witnessed. A woman in uniform abusing her authority and being forced to answer for it. As she reached the front of the cabin, she turned abruptly, her eyes blazing. For a moment, she looked directly at the woman in the aisle seat. The glare carried venom, but it was powerless now. The woman didn't return the glare. She simply adjusted her jacket sleeve and looked past her, calm and untouched. That indifference stung more than any words could. The supervisor gestured sharply toward the exit. "Ma'am, now." With a furious huff, she stormed through the open door, her trolley clattering against the narrow frame as she dragged it out of sight. The door sealed behind her with a hiss, and just like that, the chapter closed. The cabin broke into applause again, louder this time, joined by relieved laughter from some passengers. A child clapped along, giggling, not fully understanding the weight of what had just occurred, but sensing the release of tension. Phones remained raised. documenting every second. Clips of her exit would soon loop endlessly online, stripped of the authority she once thought untouchable. The woman who had endured the humiliation, however, did not cheer. She didn't smile, didn't revel in the downfall of her aggressor. Instead, she leaned back into her seat, her calm presence an unspoken statement. She hadn't won by shouting or by lashing out, but by refusing to surrender her dignity. The applause died slowly, replaced by the ordinary sounds of a flight preparing to leave. Luggage bins clicked shut, seatbelts fastened, overhead announcements resumed. Yet, nothing about the atmosphere felt ordinary. Every passenger knew they had been part of something bigger than a delay, bigger than a dispute over a seat. The captain's voice came over the intercom, noticeably subdued. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We will be departing shortly." In row 1, the woman pulled the seatbelt across her lap, the buckle clicking into place with a quiet finality. The cameras still caught her, but she didn't look their way. Her chin lifted slightly, her gaze forward. While others had cheered, she reclaimed her dignity in silence. And as the engines rumbled awake, the cabin bracing for departure, everyone knew the story was far from over. By the time the wheels touched the runway at their destination, the story was already bigger than the plane itself. The passengers who had recorded the confrontation found their phones buzzing with notifications the moment they switched out of airplane mode. Videos uploaded mid-flight had spread like wildfire. The clip of the attendant whispering, "People like her always cause problems," replayed endlessly across social platforms, fueling outrage. Another video of her being escorted off to scattered applause climbed rapidly toward 1 million views. Hashtags linked the airline's name to words like racism, discrimination, and humiliation. Inside the terminal, strangers who hadn't even been on the flight were waiting at the gate, holding up their phones to capture the now famous passenger as she exited. Her steps were steady, her chin raised. She didn't wave. She didn't address the cameras. She simply moved forward, the same way she had when boarding, unapologetic and calm. By evening, national news outlets picked up the story. Anchors replayed the grainy phone footage, pointing out the look on her face as she sat silently, refusing to move. Headlines filled the screen: "Passenger stands firm in first-class confrontation. Airline faces backlash after racist incident on board." The airline's headquarters, flooded with calls and emails, issued a statement before midnight. They apologized publicly, announcing that the flight attendant had been suspended pending review. "This does not reflect our values," the statement read. But the damage was already done. The world had seen. Commentators debated on television and podcasts across online platforms. Some dismissed it as a minor seating dispute blown out of proportion, but more voices, louder and stronger, insisted it was a reflection of something far deeper. The everyday ways dignity is denied, the silent humiliations too often endured. The woman at the center of it all never gave an interview. She declined requests for comment, turned away offers for exclusive features. When asked by a reporter outside her hotel what message she wanted to send, she said only, "I wanted to sit in the seat I paid for, that's all." Her refusal to perform for the cameras became its own kind of statement. She had not resisted for fame. She had resisted because fairness mattered. The ripple effect was undeniable. Travelers across the country began sharing their own experiences of discrimination in airports, on flights, in hotel lobbies. Hashtags filled with stories that had been buried in silence until her stand pulled them into the open. Airline executives scrambled to announce new training programs, anti-bias workshops, and policy reviews. Whether those changes would last was uncertain. But the conversation had been forced into the light. The passengers who had witnessed it firsthand carried their own reflections home. The teenager who streamed it online told his mother, "I thought it was just a seat, but now I get it. It's about more than a seat." A man in business attire admitted quietly to his wife, "I should have spoken up sooner. I won't stay silent again." And for those who had whispered she should just move, the memory of that moment lingered uncomfortably. They had seen the consequence of complacency, the ease of surrendering to prejudice disguised as procedure. In the end, the lasting image was simple. A woman, mid-30s, dressed in a suit, seated quietly in the place she had paid for, calm, unyielding. Her strength wasn't loud or violent. It was steady, dignified, and undeniable. It was the kind of strength that changed the direction of an entire conversation. Because sometimes the power of saying no, no to humiliation, no to injustice, no to being erased, is enough to echo far beyond the walls where it is first spoken, and that echo does not fade. Dignity denied is never truly denied. It waits, and it rises. What happened on that flight was not just about one woman or one seat. It was about the truth that injustice cannot erase resilience. Her calm refusal reminded everyone watching that quiet strength can be louder than cruelty. It forced a system to reckon with its prejudice, even if only for a moment. If this story moved you, subscribe to Echoes of Hope Stories HQ for more powerful true stories. And tell me, what would you have done in her seat?